Right now, engines from GM, Toyota, Ford, and Hyundai are failing across millions of vehicles, some catching fire with families still inside. Manufacturers know exactly why it's happening, and they've been hoping you never find out. You won't believe how deep this actually goes. Let's start with the numbers, because they should shake anyone who owns a vehicle from these four brands. General Motors recalled nearly 600,000 full-size trucks and SUVs for their 6.2-liter V8, the engine in the Silverado, Sierra, Tahoe, Suburban, and Escalade. GM's own investigation logged more than 28,000 complaints, a dozen crashes, and a dozen injuries tied to that single engine. And federal regulators reopened the case this year after owners who already got the recall fix reported the exact same failures happening again. Toyota isn't doing any better. Their twin-turbo V6, the engine that replaced the old bulletproof V8 in the Tundra, has now been through 3 separate recalls since 2024, covering well over 250,000 trucks and SUVs, all for the same defect: leftover manufacturing debris grinding down a main bearing until the engine knocks, loses power, or seizes completely. Ford isn't sitting this one out either. In the middle of 2025, Ford recalled certain transit vans, F-150 pickups, and Explorer SUVs after finding manufacturing defects in the connecting rods and rod bearings themselves, defects capable of causing engine damage and complete failure. And at the time, Ford still didn't have a finalized repair ready. Hyundai and Kia have recalled well over 1 million engines combined since their infamous Theta engine crisis began, and some of the replacement engines failed the exact same way the originals did. Add it up, and you're looking at millions of engines across 4 major automakers, all failing in remarkably similar ways, all at once. That's not 4 unrelated stories, that's a pattern. So what's actually causing it? Modern engines are being pushed harder than they were ever designed to be pushed. Automakers are chasing horsepower numbers per liter that used to belong to race cars, packed into blocks physically smaller than what they replaced. A typical V8 from the 1990s made around 60 horsepower per liter. A modern turbocharged 4-cylinder routinely clears double that, out of a fraction of the metal. To hit fuel economy targets on top of that, automakers switch to increasingly thin oil, fluid barely thicker than water, which demands machining tolerances measured in microns and leaves almost no room for error. That's where the real killer comes in, something almost nobody outside the engine world has heard of: leftover manufacturing debris, sometimes called swarf. When an engine block gets machined, the large metal chips get cleaned out easily. It's the ultra-thin particles left behind from honing the cylinder walls that are the real danger. A slurry, harder than the bearings it eventually destroys. A single microscopic particle caught between a bearing and a crankshaft acts like sandpaper spinning at thousands of RPM. Minutes later, that's scoring. Hours later, it's metal on metal. Days later, it's a seized engine. At a rate of thousands of engines built per factory per day, catching every particle by hand isn't realistic, so automakers lean on automated rinses and quick visual checks instead, and hope the debris doesn't make it through. Swarf and thin oil are only part of the picture, though. This isn't one design flaw or one bad batch, it's several engineering compromises stacking on top of each other. Extreme turbocharging is one of them, running cylinder pressures roughly double what a naturally aspirated engine sees, with turbos spinning past 100,000 RPM and completely dependent on clean, properly pressurized oil. Cylinder deactivation is a second factor, shutting down half the cylinders to save fuel, which creates uneven temperatures and shock loads every time those cylinders kick back on. A third factor almost nobody questions is the oil change interval printed in the manual itself, often 7,500 to 10,000 miles, calculated for ideal highway conditions rather than the short trips and constant stop-start driving most owners actually do. Start-stop technology adds a fourth layer, dropping oil pressure to almost nothing every time the engine restarts, right when today's thin oil has the least film left to protect the bearings. Variable displacement oil pumps are a fifth factor, computer-controlled instead of simple and fixed. And if that pump lags or misjudges conditions even briefly, the bearings get starved exactly when they need oil most. Direct injection is the sixth piece, spraying fuel at extremely high pressure for efficiency, at the cost of more combustion stress and a thinner oil film surviving hotter temperatures. Put all six together, and you get engines failing not from one weakness, but from several compounding at once. If you're finding this helpful, take a second to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Here's where it gets genuinely suspicious. When independent mechanics have gotten their hands on failed engines, instead of letting the manufacturer buy them back, the teardowns tell a different story than manufacturing debris. In several documented cases, the main bearings supporting the crankshaft were completely destroyed, while the rod bearings fed by that exact same oil circuit came out clean. If contamination in the oil were really the cause, both should show damage, since they share the same supply. Only one side failing points somewhere else, a design flaw. Design flaws are far more expensive for a manufacturer to admit than blaming debris, because a flaw means every engine built that way is affected, not just a subset with bad factory luck. And there's a tell hiding in plain sight. General Motors' own fix for its recalled 6.2-liter engines was switching from thin 0W20 oil to a much thicker 0W40 oil. If thin oil genuinely were not part of the problem, there would be no reason thicker oil would be the fix. The deeper root cause sits above any individual automaker in federal fuel economy regulation. For years, the rules required an automaker's entire fleet to average close to 49 miles per gallon by 2026, a number impossible to hit with conventional engines. So manufacturers squeezed every fraction of efficiency out of smaller displacement, thinner oil, and the exact technologies now showing up at the center of these failures. And instead of easing that pressure, the most recent regulatory change made it worse in a different way. Rather than softening the target, regulators eliminated the financial penalty for missing it entirely and stopped counting electric vehicles toward a manufacturer's fleet average at all. Before, a company selling gas-guzzling trucks could offset the number with electric vehicle sales or credits. That option is gone. So automakers are squeezing conventional engines even harder to hit a target that hasn't moved. Except the fine for falling short barely exists anymore. None of this is theoretical for the people driving these vehicles. These are trucks and SUVs costing $70,000, $80,000, well over $100,000 in some trims, with engines failing at 30,000 to 40,000 miles, sometimes less. Picture it. You've saved for years, finally bought the truck you wanted, you're driving your kids to school 6 months later, and you hear a knock, then grinding, then the engine seizes entirely. You coast to the shoulder. The dealer confirms it needs a full replacement, covered under warranty, but the replacement engine is back-ordered for months, and you're still making the full payment on a truck sitting dead in a service bay. When you finally get it back, it's a vehicle with a documented engine replacement, and resale value takes a permanent hit. And safety is the part that gets buried under all the financial pain. Metal fragments tearing through an engine at thousands of RPM, an engine losing all power in the middle of traffic. These are the kinds of failures that put families at real risk, not just their wallets. If you own one of these vehicles, protect yourself. Check your VIN at nhtsa.gov for any open recalls and get repairs done immediately, rather than waiting. Cut your oil change interval well below what the manual recommends, especially on a low viscosity spec. Use your start-stop button every time you drive if your vehicle has one. since those cycles are some of the hardest wear your bearings will see. Once you're out of warranty, consider a slightly thicker oil grade than the factory spec, the same move GM made on its own recalled engines. And don't ignore early knocking or ticking. Get it checked immediately, rather than hoping it goes away. Drop a comment if your engine has failed, and let's compare notes on what you're seeing.